Tired of spending hundreds of dollars for prescription glasses? Zenni offers thousands of affordable eyewear styles, starting at just $6.95. No ridiculous markups, no hassles, just quality, affordable eyewear delivered right to you. Visit Zenni today at zenni.com/CNN.
Good evening. The world changed today for President Trump, and it could change even more tonight if and when Democrats, who now control the House, push through legislation to reopen the government. The White House has already threatened to veto it. We'll bring you that as it happens. For now, we'll focus on the longer term and potentially more serious consequence of Democrats in power. For the first time since taking office, President Trump is facing the prospect of real, extensive, and wide-ranging scrutiny from the opposition party led by a highly disciplined adversary.
And to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, I extend to you this gavel. Thank you.
That happened at about 2:30 Eastern Time. About 90 minutes later, markets closed with the Dow Industrials nearly 700 points lower on the day. On top of that, the government shutdown entered its 13th day. All in all, a very sobering day. So what did the president do in the wake of it all? Well, he made a surprise appearance in the White House briefing room with leaders of a Border Patrol officer union who praised him on his wall. It was billed as a press conference, but neither he nor Press Secretary Sarah Sanders took any questions, making it something of a stunt. He also put up another one of those weird Game of Thrones movie-type posters of himself on Instagram, this one saying, "The wall is coming," which is the subject for the ridiculous a little bit later tonight. We'll also talk later about whether movie posters and briefing cameos are just shiny objects to distract from more serious matters, like the not-so-shiny, very real bottom line the president now faces. A whole new world for him, one in which the Speaker of the House is a member of the opposition party, and she's not ruling out impeachment.
We shouldn't be impeaching for a political reason, and we shouldn't avoid impeachment for a political reason. So we'll just have to see how it comes.
She says she wants to go slow, but the new Democratic chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, says it's not too soon to be talking about it. His colleague today, Congressman Brad Sherman, actually took the step of introducing articles of impeachment, which makes him an outlier for now. But it does underscore how potentially serious this could get for the president, who, as you know, is now being investigated along with his company and his now defunct charity by Robert Mueller's team, by the Southern District of New York, by the New York Attorney General. And now you can add Congressman Elijah Cummings' House Oversight Committee to that mix, and the House Judiciary Committee, now chaired by Jerry Nadler, who's long been calling for more investigation.
We have to find out exactly what was going on. We have to look at the Russian interference with the campaign and what did the president know about that, and to what extent did he cooperate with that. If he did, we have to look at his business dealings and his lying about that. We have to look at the fact that he surrounded himself with crooks, and we have to get to the bottom of this.
Well, today he took a step in that direction, introducing legislation to protect Special Counsel Mueller. He told Armando Raju he wants to hear from Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker whether he's willing or not.
Still trying to get a date. And they're dragging their feet on a date. We'll see what happens.
Will you send a subpoena to him if he doesn't?
We will if we have to.
And now, for the first time in the Trump presidency, the opposition party has subpoena power. Whatever you think of the acting attorney general, or the president for that matter, it's a far cry from the days when a chairman of the House Intelligence Committee who's friendly to the White House can go to the White House, get talking points from someone there, and then later pretend to have just briefed the president on the very same White House talking points.
Today I briefed the president on the concerns that I had about incidental collection and how it relates to President-elect Trump and his transition team, and the concerns that I have. What I've read bothers me, and I think it should bother the president himself and his team.
Well, the White House-friendly Devin Nunes no longer runs the Intelligence Committee. Congressman Adam Schiff does, and just about an hour ago he made news saying he's preparing for a committee vote to send the unredacted transcripts from all their interviews to Special Counsel Mueller. Again, you can see the change of power in the House as a good thing or a bad thing, but good or bad, one thing is beyond debate. It is now a different world politically for this president and this administration. We'll, of course, bring you the House budget vote tonight when it happens. But first, some perspective from California Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who serves on the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees. I spoke to him just a short time ago. Congressman, today Speaker Pelosi said that the incoming House will be, quote, for the people. Do you think voters are going to view multiple investigations into the president as for the people?
Well, it'll be for a balance of power on many abuses of power that we've seen in the past. But we can't miss the opportunity to also do what they sent us here, which was to collaborate on infrastructure, passing the DREAM Act, having background checks, and reforming prescription drugs. And Anderson, those are all things that Donald Trump said he wanted to do, including even at last year's State of the Union, but a Republican Congress never brought forward. So we're going to put that forward, but we're also not going to shirk our oversight responsibilities.
Some of your fellow Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee introduced legislation to protect the Mueller investigation. Okay. Even if that bill were to pass in the full House, McConnell has made it clear he doesn't see a need for it, won't bring it to the Senate floor for a vote. So is a House vote anything more than just symbolic? Does it matter?
Well, we also hope that it will build momentum on the Senate side, that vulnerable senators will see that the will of the American people is that they want this investigation protected, and that it's already passed in a bipartisan vote on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and hopefully would come to a full vote. But Mitch McConnell, by not allowing this to come forward, is suppressing the will of the majority of his own members. And so I think it's going to take outside voices. You saw today Cory Gardner's already coming forward talking about ending the shutdown by not having wall approval, and he's in a tight seat. There's other Republican senators in a similar fashion. So I think you're going to see pressure build.
But do you think this is what we're going to see a lot of over the next 2 years, bills that pass the Democratic-led House and yet really have no chance at all of passing a Republican-led Senate?
Well, I think a lot of what we're going to do is just purely protect health care from being cut even further, the protections that were put in place by the Affordable Care Act, protect paychecks from, seeing tax cuts go only to the top and not to working families, and protect against corruption. And yes, advance, as I said, on transportation, prescription drugs, background checks where we can, but also it's going to be the 2020 field, I think, that's going to really put forward what Democratic priorities will be if we have the House and the Senate in 2021.
As mentioned earlier, fellow House Democrat of yours took the step today of introducing articles of impeachment against the president. Is that a smart move in your opinion, or do you think it's counterproductive at this point?
It's not a move that I support. This president, Anderson, may be impeached, but we're certainly not there with the evidence. We are going to, look where Republicans were unwilling to look before and build an airtight case if that's what's necessary, seek bipartisan buy-in, and make sure if we go that way, the American people understand why. But we should not be as reckless with the facts as Donald Trump is, and we should give him probably a fairer investigation than he deserves.
Well, just lastly, the upcoming vote in the Intelligence Committee to send Mueller its unredacted interview transcripts. What do you expect Mueller to learn from them that he doesn't already know?
Well, he'll see that in the basement of the House Intelligence Committee are just boxes of transcripts that have lies of witnesses who came before us, were not straightforward. Some of them, like Roger Stone, have had to amend their testimony over and over because of free press reporting that showed that he wasn't straightforward. And so I hope those witnesses are held accountable and that it helps Bob Mueller's investigation.
Congressman Swalwell, appreciate your time. Thanks.
My pleasure.
So we're seeing divided government play out tonight as we speak, and challenges to the president have been coming all day. I want to talk about it. CNN chief legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Jeffrey Toobin joins me. Also USA Today columnist and CNN political analyst Kirsten Powers, and former Republican senator and presidential candidate Rick Santorum. Jeff, you heard Congressman Swalwell talk about the very real consequences when the Intelligence Committee turns over those unredacted witness testimony. Do you buy that?
Yes, I think it is significant. I don't know if any of those statements will be proven to be false, but you could not bring a criminal case without the actual transcript. So it is it is a necessary but not sufficient step for Mueller to bring these cases. And it's only logical, it's only fair for him to have these to do a complete investigation.
Senator Santorum, how worried would you be if you're the president and you don't have an ally like Devin Nunes running the House Intelligence Committee anymore?
Look, I mean, for the president, this comes down to two things. Number one, impeachment, and the House is going to do what the House is going to do. The Senate will never, at least given the current state of play right now, is not going to come anywhere close to impeaching the president. The second is simply things that they can do to harass the president. And this is one of those harassment things. I mean, it's not going to touch the president. There are people that may have said things that under oath that turned out to be wrong. Again, that doesn't really do anything other than create more smoke, but no real fire for the president.
Kirsten, do you think Democrats in the House should be cautious on how they approach the prospect of impeachment? And we've talked about this before. In our next hour, I'm going to speak with the Congressman Jerry Connolly, who's now in the majority of the House Oversight Committee. And he says he's already seen enough, just with the president being an unindicted co-conspirator in the Cohen filing.
Look, I mean, Donald Trump is obviously extremely unpopular with the base of the Democratic Party. And so it's understandable that there are people who want him out of office any way possible and, you know, are letting their passion probably get a little ahead of themselves and not considering that the kind of blowback that can come from these kinds of actions. And we've seen this in history when there has been overreach. So I think the position that Nancy Pelosi has staked out, which is really the position of the Democratic Party at this point, is you need to wait for the investigation. And if we get to a point where you have a president who's been indicted, for example, then yes, you should start looking at possibly impeaching him. But I don't think based on what they have in front of them at this point, that there are any impeachable offenses that, at least, you know, as far as I think the average American would look at it, would feel it would be appropriate to be doing
and
that.
Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, they are so aware of the precedent of 1998 when the House Republicans rushed ahead with impeachment, knowing there would never be 67 votes in the Senate to remove President Clinton. They're not going to do that again. They're not going to make that mistake. So, you know, we can talk about...
A lot of Republicans will say, though, the drumbeat, the pressure is just going to build, and whether or not they right now think they're going to do it, they're going to get let into doing it.
It's just not true. I mean, it's just not true.
Senator Santorum, go ahead.
Yeah, Anderson, the timing is really important here. I was there in 1997 and 98. Bill Clinton had just gotten reelected, and these things came out, and the drumbeat started. We were looking at 4 more years or 3.5 more years of Bill Clinton. Here, you're in the middle of a presidential race right now. We're the last 2 years of his first term. And so the timing is just very different. The chance to beat Donald Trump is not going to be through impeachment. We're not going to beat Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was elected for his last 4 years, and the only way we're going to get rid of Bill Clinton is through impeachment. That's not the case here. The case before you is really making a political case for 2020. That's why I think impeachment is probably not going to happen, because it's just not good politics for the Democrats.
God, for the first time ever, I just could not agree more than Rick with Rick Santorum. I think every word you just said was perfect.
But it's interesting because, Rick, I thought you were going to say the exact opposite, because a lot of Republicans we have talked to who have been arguing with Jeff about this say, you can say all you want right now that they're not going to go for impeachment, but it's going to be irresistible to them.
I just don't think. Look, what they're interested in is beating Donald Trump, getting rid of Donald Trump, and gaining more political power. It's going to be obvious that the best way to do that is to do all the harassment. There may be some smoke of impeachment or even some discussion. But the idea of actually trying to force an impeachment resolution in the United States Senate, I think, is just very bad politics in the midst of an election.
The other thing you have to remember, I think, Anderson, the reason a lot of these people are saying that is, I mean, some of them may believe it, but they're mostly doing it to gin up the president's base. This idea that the president, and they were doing it a lot leading up to the midterms, this idea that, you know, that this is what's going to happen if the Democrats get control of Congress. They're going to impeach the president, so you need to vote for Republicans. And to continue to make it seem like the president is under this sort of imminent threat of the crazy progressives coming for him. But I think that people who think that this could happen just don't understand Nancy Pelosi.
They will, Kirsten, they'll be coming for him. They just there's lots of ways to come after Donald Trump.
I'm talking about impeachment.
Yeah,
impeachment.
Right. There's better ways to skin this cat.
I remain on Team Santorum, but I would not call it harassment. I would say oversight. This is what Congress is supposed to do. But I think your analysis of the motivations of the Democrats is exactly right.
But Jeff, what about, I mean, Nadler, who's obviously the new chairman of the Judiciary, has said that in the past, even a crime should not necessarily equal impeachment. He didn't say the president should automatically get a pass, but he basically said, look, it would take an extreme step.
It would take an extreme step. And look, obviously depends on what information comes out. But certainly the universe of evidence that we are all aware of, or what is likely to come out, certainly doesn't suggest to me there is anything out there that might garner 67 votes in the Senate. And Nancy Pelosi knows that, Jerry Nadler knows that, and they're just not going to go on that fool's errand.
If, Senator Santorum, I mean, if Democrats in the House take it slow, wait for the Mueller report, and decide it is damning enough to proceed to impeachment, they'd be basing that conclusion on the report of a Republican former FBI director, a Republican recipient of the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. I mean, the president has tried to paint Mueller as some partisan hack. In an election year, that's an argument you can make, but it's not really true.
Well, the bottom line is that Bob Mueller surrounded himself with a bunch of Democrats on his team, and who have rather in some cases scurrilous backgrounds, and when it comes to who they go after. So I don't think Mueller is really going to be the issue here. The issue is, does the American public and are a significant number of Republicans going to read this report and see this as a Nixon-esque type of situation? A former senator from Pennsylvania, Hugh Scott, looked at all the evidence as a Republican and went to the president and said, we can't do this. We're not going to stand by you. If it reaches that point, we'll know. The Democrats won't have to push it. But as Jeffrey said, I don't see anything in the Mueller leaks and other information that's been out there that rises to this level at this point.
You still on Team Santorum?
He's on Team Tubin. It's a beautiful thing, Rick. I mean, it's a whole new year. It's going to be great.
All right. How about that? Let's take a break on that. Coming up, let's just bask in that thought for a little while. We're going to talk about the president's news conference in name only. He took no questions, of course, supplied no answers, but did say that he knows more about drones than anybody, so there's always that. And later, we'll keep digging into something Speaker Pelosi said today when asked if she thought a sitting president could be indicted. Her answer got both the legal and political types buzzing. We'll take a look ahead.
Tired of spending hundreds of dollars for prescription glasses? Our friends at Zenni Optical offer a huge variety of high-quality, stylish frames and state-of-the-art optics starting at just $6.95. You can get multiple frames with this great pricing for less than one pair elsewhere. Start building your eyewear wardrobe from the comfort of your own home at Zenni.com. With the latest trends in eyewear available in hundreds of frame styles and materials, there isn't a better way to change it up for every season. Plus, Zenni offers prescription sunglasses at incredible prices. Visit Zenni today at Zenni.com/CNN. That's ZENNI.com/CNN.
We're waiting for the House, now in Democratic hands, to vote on a series of funding bills to reopen the government. The White House has already threatened to veto the legislation, making it more of a negotiation tactic than anything else, which in a different way and perhaps to a very different degree. So was the president's non-press conference late today. CNN's Caitlin Collins at the White House with more on that. So what was explain what happened in the briefing room today, because it certainly wasn't a briefing.
It certainly wasn't a briefing, because at a press briefing, you've got to take questions from the reporters in the room, and that didn't happen today. But the White House came over the loudspeaker in the briefing room, said there was going to be a press briefing with the press secretary in about 5 minutes, and you saw these reporters scramble to get in the room. You can't really tell in that video there, but there were a lot of empty seats toward the back of the room because some of those reporters just weren't here because there had been nothing on the president's schedule today. Then the president came in with these members of the Border Patrol Union. He spoke briefly and then invited them up to make brief remarks, but then the president, the press secretary, and the White House communications director all left the room, Anderson, without taking any questions from the reporters who were sitting there. Now, as this was going on, there was supposed to be a briefing with the Customs and Border Patrol commissioner today, on the record, on camera briefing, where he was going to take questions from reporters about the state of what's going on at the border, but they bumped that briefing because they were told that the White House was doing a briefing instead. So instead, that briefing didn't happen. They had the president of the union come out, but he didn't answer questions either, and none of those questions were answered today.
So while we're waiting for the House to vote on a bill to reopen the government, the White House, they've already responded.
Yeah, and we knew this was going to happen, but they've officially put out this statement saying that if somehow those bills do get to the president's desk, he's not going to sign them. In fact, he's going to veto them, and that is what our reporting from this week had showed. And in this statement today, the White House said, quote, they can't accept bills that have unnecessary spending while ignoring, quote, urgent border security needs. That's exactly what we expected to come from the White House, and that continues as we are essentially still very much in this deadlock between the White House and Democrats, something that only seems to be getting further and further by the day now, even though they were now 13 days into this. And Anderson, this comes as our reporting here at CNN shows that even the president's own senior aides are not encouraging him to accept those Democratic proposals and reopen the government.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thanks very much. Back now with our team. Jeff, what was that today? Was that simply the president not liking the attention on Nancy Pelosi and wanting to kind of retake the stage?
Well, that was, I think, a big part of it. It was also just another opportunity to talk about border security. I have to say, just throughout the day, I was so struck by these various tableaux, these pictures of the Democratic and Republican parties. They look so different. I mean, this is a party almost exclusively, at least at this level, of white men, the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is a much more diverse party. I mean, you just look at the members of the House of Representatives, you look at the people at that briefing. I mean, this is a picture of the differences between the parties that is just profound.
Kirsten, did that strike you today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something I think even as we were, on election night looking at all the different types of people that had been elected, primarily in the Democratic Party, from all sorts of diverse groups of people, there is something very, very noteworthy that the Republican Party is very much, it feels to me, stuck in the past, in the sense that it's very much the way it used to be, which is mostly white men, and the Democratic Party is very much the party of the future, which is the direction that the country is moving. I mean, we are a country that has become vastly more diverse than it used to be, and I think that that's really reflected in the Democratic caucus.
Senator Santorum, do you have the same view of the Republican Party and the future of it?
I think the demographics for Republicans are a challenge, and frankly, I think the approach that Donald Trump has taken is really the solution to this problem, and that is to appeal to blue collar working people of all races, colors, creeds, and Trump has problems doing that from a personal standpoint, but from a policy standpoint, and if you look at what the lives of people who of color who are wage earners in America, they're doing much better, much better, and poverty levels are lower. There's a lot to be said for the policies that the president's communicating that are actually look what happened in Florida with the school choice issue and in the governor's race. There's opportunities for Republicans from a policy point of view to begin to reach voters that are more diverse. President steps in his message too much for him to be able to do that effectively. But I think in the long term, there's actually a path forward.
Is that because he's a racist?
No. Well, that's because he says things that are incendiary. I mean, we all know that. I mean, we don't have to repeat that.
He says racist things.
No, look, I don't think the president is a racist. I don't think he's any ist, if you will, sexist, whatever. But the president does say things that are controversial and that can offend people, and that gets in the way of his message.
But isn't that the message?
No, the message is the policy. I mean, look, I mean, people are going to see a president as for what they are, with all their faults. It's what the president is doing. And I think the president's policies have actually been very, very favorable to across demographic groups, and he just hasn't effectively communicated that.
I'm not even sure that that's accurate. A lot of what's happening in the economy was happening before Donald Trump came into office. I mean, the economy just doesn't turn around that quickly, so I'm not sure that he gets all the credit. And obviously, we're having a lot of problems with the stock market, but that's a separate issue. But the fact of the matter is, the way people vote, it's not just about how you affect them economically. It's about whether you're speaking to the issues that are really important to them, the cultural issues that are really important to them. It doesn't matter how good Bill Clinton was on the economy, if somebody felt like he had the wrong position on abortion, they weren't going to vote for him. And it's the same thing with people of color, and I think a lot of women, when they look at the rhetoric of this president, him attacking NFL players, the constant kind of drumbeat of the Republican Party against Black Lives Matter, calling them a terrorist organization, not really speaking up about the violence against African Americans by police officers, and on and on. These are the issues that really matter to people, and I don't think the Republican Party has really come to terms with that.
Well, I couldn't disagree with you more. I think that the organizations you mentioned, the Black Lives Matter, does promote a lot of very hateful things. So look, the bottom line is that the Republicans have an obligation to go out there.
What hateful things? Wait, I'm sorry.
I don't think we need to spend a whole.
I don't think you can come up with an example.
There are all sorts of clips and posters of folks in these marches that are as racist on the other way as the white racists are to blacks.
There are posters at all groups. That doesn't make the group itself hateful. I mean, basically, Black Lives Matter is just the basic idea that Black lives matter, and that we need to actually treat Black lives with the same reverence that we treat white lives.
But you can't just wipe away all of the things that are said and written and done at these marches as a fringe element. Any more than you would wipe those away from a group. Any more than you would wipe those away from a group of whites doing the same thing. Look, they have the reality is, setting aside that issue, that Republicans have an obligation and work to do when it comes to communicating. You're right. Yeah. Not just the policy, but the fact that we are concerned about these things and we talk about these things and we want to bring people and engage in those discussions. You're absolutely right on that front.
Just quickly, do you think that President Trump should bend on the wall in these shutdown negotiations? Because some senators like Lindsey Graham are advising him not to bend, and that if he did, it would be the beginning of the end of his presidency.
Look, if there was a substantive reason why Democrats didn't want to support this wall, then there might be a reason to bend. But it's not substantive. Look, there are, I think, 650 miles of border wall that have been put up. The law says 700. Chuck Schumer voted for that. So even though the wall that he voted for hasn't been built yet. So the idea that there is some principled objection to a wall. Would they like to tear down the wall in Tijuana because it doesn't work? Of course it works. I've been to that wall. It works. Walls do work. So the idea that this is a policy discussion, it's not. This is purely political, and I think the president in that regard has to stand firm.
All right.
Our honeymoon was good while it lasted, but it was brief, Rick.
Jeff Tippett, Kirsten Powers,
come see, come saw. Yeah.
Rick Santorum, thanks very much. With Democrats running the House, an impeachment might not be the worst-case scenario for President Trump ahead. Speaker Pelosi on whether the president could be indicted while in office. Plus, there's breaking news of the American accused of spying by Russia amid talk he could become part of a prisoner swap. Next.
Remember, to create an ad like this one, visit purewinning.com/CNN.
Well, that didn't take long. Just after the 116th Congress got sworn in today, two Democratic House members reintroduced a bill calling for the impeachment of President Trump. It's not the only possible option that could threaten the Trump presidency, depending on what Robert Mueller's team finds. In an interview that aired this morning, Nancy Pelosi wouldn't rule out the idea of an indictment against the president.
There is long-standing Department of Justice guidance that states a sitting president should not be indicted. But it is not the law.
No, it is not the law. Everything indicates that a president can be indicted after he is no longer president of the United States.
What about a sitting president?
Well, a sitting president when he's no longer president of the United States.
A president who is in office. Right. Could Robert Mueller come back and say, I am seeking an indictment?
I think that is an open discussion. I think that is an open discussion in terms of the law.
Tonight, a new controversy for the president's acting attorney general, Matthew Whitaker. A source confirms to CNN that just yesterday, Whitaker told former Reagan Attorney General Ed Meese that the Department of Justice is continuing to investigate the FBI over its surveillance of former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page and its Clinton Foundation probe. Now, that's important because Meese is now a private citizen, gaining knowledge about a probe the Justice Department has kept silent about publicly for nearly a year. Neil Katyal was acting Solicitor General under President Obama. He joins us now. Neil, is Nancy Pelosi right? I mean, is whether or not a sitting president can be indicted an open discussion?
It is an open discussion, but, I think the president's team has been saying a sitting president can't be indicted, and at least in this context, it's a very Trumpy claim. I mean, Donald Trump has not exactly cared about the Constitution over the last 2 years, and now all of a sudden he suddenly discovers that the Constitution he claims protects him. It's particularly hard for him, though, to make this claim because he is a self-described strict constructionist, someone who looks at the text of the Constitution and interprets the document, and there is no clause in the Constitution that prevents a sitting president from being indicted.
By the way, do you think he spent a lot of time looking at the text of the Constitution and studying the document?
One wishes he would, but yes, exactly. That's part of the problem.
You actually helped draft the special counsel regulations that Mueller is operating under. They do require him to abide by established DOJ policy. Is that right?
That's correct. And so the Justice Department has written 2 opinions in 1973 and in 1999 that say in general a sitting president can't be indicted. However, I don't think they apply to this situation. They say in general, so they're dealing with crimes that occur while the president is in office or something like that. But these crimes go to how he won the presidency in the first place. And the opinions don't encompass that. So imagine this, Anderson. Imagine we had a race of 1,000 meters, and the winner of that 1,000-meter race would win a get-out-of-jail-free card. And everyone knows that's what the prize is. I don't think we would say that you get to apply the get-out-of-jail card to those who are accused of cheating in the race in the first place. Because if you did, you'd be incentivizing people to, take illegal dope or something like that, to secretly trip people who are opponents in the race and the like. And, lo and behold, that's exactly what these allegations are, that the Southern District of New York career prosecutors have said Donald Trump directed the commission of serious campaign finance felonies and then covered it up afterwards. So, and that very well may have swung the election. I don't think that those opinions apply.
At the end of the day, is this going to be, at least in terms of, the law, out of Mueller's hands and in the hands of what's now a democratically led House of Representatives?
Well, I think there's 2 different actors, the House of Representatives and the acting Attorney General, right now, Matthew Whitaker. Because the Department of Justice special counsel regulations say it'll at least be up to Whitaker in the first instance to decide whether or not a president could be indicted.
Right.
And Whitaker has given us really no basis for confidence in his judgment. I mean, as we saw yesterday. I mean, imagine, Anderson, if I started your show today with this. Mr. Cooper, I'll start by highlighting the fact you stayed in New York over the holidays, give up Christmas with your family, New Year's with your family. You've demonstrated your dedication to delivering. If I said all of that to you, I think your readers would be aghast and think I'm just a suck-up artist. And that is what the acting Attorney General said yesterday in a televised meeting to the president. This is not someone who should be in charge of our law enforcement apparatus at all, and certainly not someone who is deciding this ultimate question of whether a sitting president could be indicted by Mueller or the Southern District of New York.
I would like all my guests to praise me for working on New Year's Eve, actually. Just lastly, I want to get your take on Whitaker briefing former Attorney General Ed Meese about an ongoing DOJ investigation. While it might, be ethically problematic, is it also problematic from a legal standpoint?
Well, it certainly could be, but we don't know what was said, and obviously you can't give grand jury information or things like that to anyone outside of the circle of law enforcement officials. But it's not clear to me that that's what happened. Mm-hmm. So I think we really have to learn more about the facts there. But look, the public record of Whitaker demonstrates day in and day out this is someone who should not be our nation's chief law enforcement officer.
Okay, I'll appreciate it. Thanks very much. Tonight, breaking news about the American businessman arrested by Russia for allegedly spying. The lawyer for Paul Whelan of Michigan confirms he now faces formal espionage charges. We're just learning about what might have led to his arrest. Our Matthew Chance has more now from Moscow. So, Matthew, well, Secretary of State Pompeo said he couldn't offer much additional information about Whelan. The Russian news site seems to be providing an explanation. What have you learned?
Yeah, Rosbolt is the name of this privately owned Russian news agency. They've interviewed what they say is an intelligence source who has sort of talked through the actual steps, the situation in which Paul Whelan, this U.S. Marine who was arrested for espionage, was actually detained. He was at a 5-star hotel in the centre of Moscow, the Metropole Hotel. He was in his room, apparently, and 5 minutes, it says, after he received a flash drive, a USB flash drive, with the names of the employees of a top security agency in Russia. He was then arrested. That was the basis for his arrest. It also talks about his Russian social media platform. It's been well known that Paul Whelan for several years now has engaged on Russian social media like VKontakte, VK, which is like the Russian version of Facebook. Many of the people on that site that were his friends basically were former or current members of the Russian security forces. What the Ross Bolt article says is that those people were pre-picked by US intelligence for him to befriend and to extract whatever information he could out of them. Now, we can't independently verify that report or its content, and of course the intelligence source may have actually had a reason, a narrative to build around the arrest. But it's an interesting idea.
You spoke to Whelan's lawyer yesterday. What was he able to tell you about the charges or reports about the flash drive? Did he say anything?
No, he wouldn't be drawn on that. He would only talk about the actual condition of Paul Whelan in this Lefortovo prison in a suburb of Moscow. He said he was pretty cheerful. He said he wasn't depressed in any way. Lacked a few sort of sanitary items like razors and clean underwear and things like that, but that was being sorted out. Painted a generally very positive picture of Paul Whelan's incarceration. And he's applied for bail as well. But he also warned that the Russian legal system can be very slow. And he said it could be, 6 months before this espionage case gets to trial. So it could be in for a long wait, Anderson.
Matthew, stay with us. I want to bring in our national security analyst, Steve Hall. He's a retired CIA chief of Russia operations. Steve, what do you make of this, about this person, about what's going on?
Well, Anderson, I hate to be smug, but you heard it here first. It took the Russians only a couple of days to come up with some really, really good propaganda and some really convincing and compelling stories to Westerners' ears, to Americans' ears. That all sounds really reasonable, right? You had this American, who was somehow tasked by U.S. intelligence, and he's in a hotel room, and somebody shows up with a flash drive, and the Russians have made all of this up. There is no rule of law in Russia. There is no, free press. The whole idea that the Russian lawyer, by the way, who works for the government, for Putin one way or the other, because he lives in Russia and is therefore susceptible to any pressure that the government puts on him, so he's not really representing this American, says that the whole thing might take 6 months. Well, there have been other conditions when Vladimir Putin has wanted to do something within 24 or 48 hours, and it simply happens on the legal front because, again, he can overrule anything. So this is all one big show for Vladimir Putin, and he's just figured out a way to kick America around, and it's by taking essentially hostages. This guy's actually a hostage as opposed to anything else. That's the best way to think of it.
You actually think you think of him as a hostage?
I do, because he's certainly not an intelligence officer. There's no way that he would have done any of those. I mean, that's simply not how American intelligence works in Moscow or other places, although they will paint a very compelling picture because the Russians are excellent at doing that. So they've just arrested this guy. It could be anybody. It could be you, could be me. I would not advise any of my friends or family to go to Russia at this point, because it doesn't matter whether you're delivering papers for a living or whether you work for a company. You could be snatched up and then used in whatever political ploy that Vladimir Putin wants to do, and that's what's happened here.
I mean, it's such a scary idea that you hire a Russian attorney, and as you say, because he lives in Russia, he's not really representing his client. Matthew, now that Whelan has been formally charged, I mean, is there any idea when his case might go to court, or to Steve's point, could this be handled in some other way, based on higher levels of government intervention?
Well, I think it's absolutely right to say that, if Putin wants a guilty verdict in Russia, he's going to get one. I mean, there's not the sort of separation of powers, the independence of the judiciary in this country that you have in the United States or any other sort of democratic country. And I think what Putin's angling for, and this has been speculated about a lot, is some kind of prisoner swap. We've got Maria Butina in the United States, who's going to be sentenced shortly, and she's cooperating with the authorities at the moment, but she faces a prison sentence. The Russians want her back. There's a number of other prominent sort of Russians that are being held in US prisons that I'm sure the Russians would absolutely love to get back, and may use Paul Whelan as some kind of negotiating chip in order to do that. The person that springs to mind for me is Victor Bout. He's one of the world's most notorious arms traffickers, and he's serving a 25-year prison sentence in a US jail at the moment. He's been dubbed the Merchant of Death. The Russians sorely want that individual back, and they've called his detention by the United States a hostage situation as well. And so I'm absolutely sure that some kind of prisoner exchange or swap in the future is what the Kremlin may be thinking about.
Steve, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Victor Bout example is a very good one. It could be somebody that Putin is looking at. Look, this guy's lawyer, Whelan's lawyer, was the one who said himself that he's really intent on getting Butina back. So there's no doubt as to what's going on here. The bottom line, Anderson, is that until the United States of America and until the rest of the West and the alliance that we have, not just NATO, but all of our Western relationships, decide that they're going to push back hard on Vladimir Putin, that they're not going to put up with this stuff anymore, that they're not going to put up with hostage taking, with arresting random Americans and then holding out for somebody like Victor Bout or anybody else, Butina or whoever it might be. He's going to keep doing this. And based on this administration's relationship, comments, thoughts about Vladimir Putin and Russia, I am not sanguine as to the likelihood that this is going to end well for the United States, or perhaps for this American citizen who's being held, by the way, in a horrible prison. Lefortovo is not a nice place, regardless of what this lawyer says.
Yeah. Steve Hall, I appreciate your expertise. Matthew Chance as well. Thanks. Coming up, remember that fake movie poster that was inexplicably sitting on the table in front of the president at his cabinet meeting? Kellyanne Conway was asked what it meant today. Her answer just ahead. And by that, I mean the ridiculous is next.
Good day, Sweet World! Jay Skeets here from the Starters, and basketball is back. Join me, Tass, Lee, and Trey at 6 Eastern every weeknight on NBA TV as we break down everything that matters to NBA fans, from trade rumors to Twitter beefs. And don't forget to check out our podcast, The Drop, now dropping twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and NBA.com/The Starters. Until then, embrace the day, people.
Time now for the ridiculous, and tonight we have an enigma wrapped in a mystery inside a ridiculous. Last night we told you about the curious case of the fake movie poster on the table in front of the president at his cabinet meeting. It was a blown-up version of a tweet he sent out in November with "sanctions are coming" in the Game of Thrones font. Now, at the time, it referred to sanctions against Iran. The question was, why did someone now print out a poster-sized version of that, and why did they now set it on the desk yesterday directly in front of the president? Now, luckily, Fox and Friends was ready to get to the bottom of it with Kellyanne Conway today.
Kellyanne, what was with the poster yesterday on the table?
That's just the president. Sanctions are coming November 4th. But look, I think the president speaking for 95 minutes and holding forth on any number of issues shows his transparency and shows that he is always willing to have the press in the room. I talked to him last night after the Situation Room meeting, and he wants to invite them back and perhaps even let the cameras in. Well, they can all decide that.
Okay, well, that didn't really clear it up. Kellyanne Conway continued to speak for 1 minute and 4 seconds, talking about transparency and how much time the president spends in the cabinet room, and Mitt Romney and welcoming solutions. Everything but the poster. We're going to just pick up the stream of consciousness at the point where the Fox and Friends tried yet again to get an answer.
They need border security. They need more people at the border. They need steel slats. They need a wall. They need any number of measures to help us.
But the poster just happened to be there, or was it a message? It was a message. Are sanctions coming November 4th, or what are they?
Well, I'll let it speak for itself, and the president maybe will be asked about that later on.
Okay. November 4th was, it could be November 4th next year, I guess. I'll let that speak for itself. What could possibly speak for itself more than an enlargement of a Game of Thrones ripoff dated 2 months ago and referring to sanctions suddenly showing up at a cabinet meeting and never being referred to? Now, when you think about it, it's clear as covfefe. Remember that tweet? despite the negative press covfefe. The White House explained that one with just as much aplomb. This is a true blast from the past. We have to go way back, deep into the bushes, to the era of audio-only press briefings by the one and only Sean Spicer.
Do you think people should be concerned that the president posted somewhat of an incoherent tweet last night and that it then stayed up for hours?
No.
Why did it stay up so long? Is no one watching this?
No, I think the president and a small group of people know exactly what he meant. Blake.
What does confetti mean? What does he mean?
Blake.
What is confetti?
What is covfefe? Obviously, there wasn't any small group of people who knew what covfefe meant, just as that poster doesn't speak for itself. But today, something showed up on the president's Instagram. The same knockoff with a new slogan, "The wall is coming." So is this the poster that should have been on the table yesterday and some intern or the acting chief of staff printed the wrong one? And if it was the right one, is Trump one of the White Walkers, or is he one of the Night's Watch guarding the wall that hasn't been built? But he couldn't be because Jon Snow allowed wildlings to come through said wall. I guess we're just going to have to hold our dragons and wait and see what happens on the next installment of The Ridiculous. Speaks for itself. Still to come, the blue wave officially washing into the House and President Trump desperately trying to change the message, living in a whole new Washington today than he was just yesterday. Now on a collision course with Congress. We're live at the White House and Capitol Hill. Next.
Hey, Sekou Smith here from the Hang Time Podcast. Join me and my main man, John Schumann, every week as we break down the latest NBA news and storylines with guests from around the league. Be sure to subscribe to NBA Hang Time on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and NBA.com/podcast for new episodes every Monday and Thursday this season.